Welcome to this installment of the Past Grandmasters Legacy Series, interviewing past Grandmasters of the Grand Lodge of Michigan, Free and Accepted Masons. Our guest today is Charles S. Moulthrope, who was past Grandmaster from 1979 and 80, the 134th Grandmaster of the Grand Lodge. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We had a little difficulty getting a date for you because you're a traveling man these days in your retirement. You've told me that you had established some time ago a bucket list of places that you'd like to travel, and you've been to some exotic places. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that first?
Well, the wife and I, we were married about 10 years, and one night we were sitting around the kitchen table after the kids were been fed, and she cleaned up everything, and they were getting ready to go to bed. We made out a list of 5 places that we thought we'd like to go to and see sometime in our lifetime, if it was all possible. So this last month, we had our last trip. The 2nd of January, we left MBS in Bay City, flew to Honolulu. We stayed in Honolulu for 5 days, and then we got on a ship, cruise ship. We went all around the 5 islands, down through the French Polynesian islands, and ended up in Tahiti. And when we left to come back home, at 5 minutes to 12 their time on Thursday night, it was 98 degrees. When we arrived home on Saturday morning at 1:25 a.m., it was 9 below. So we did have quite a difference in temperatures. But this year has been very mild for us this time. But we had a wonderful time. We only had rain for a half an hour, and that was after we were already at the airport waiting to go out on the plane in Tahiti.
I guess we should not be surprised that you're restless at home after all your years of so much travel on behalf of Masonry. Looking back behind that, you were born in 1935 in Bay City. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, your growing up years.
Well, excuse me. I grew up basically as a normal young kid in a small town or city. I had a big bump when I was 7 years old. My dad died, and so my mother had to go to work and take care of the business that we owned. And in those days, women were really not looked favorably on in established places. But at any rate, I had 2 uncles that really shaped my personality. After that, my one uncle, Uncle Ben Bowtell, he formed a Cub Scout troop and a Boy Scout troop, and that took care of my Cub Scouting and my Boy Scouting. And Boy Scouts, I got all the way to Star. I needed one more merit badge to go out a day with the county health officer. We couldn't get it arranged, so I never got my Life and Eagle. That's all I needed left. But then Uncle Ben taught me how to shoot a shotgun, how to kill birds and find them, shoot ducks. And then my Uncle Dick Fletcher, my mother's oldest sister's husband, he taught me how to shoot a rifle and how to hunt deer. And I've been hunting deer on that same piece of property since 1949. But this is, I grew up, my great uncle, my grandfather and my grandmother on my dad's side were both dead before I was born. My grandfather on my mother's side was dead before I was born. So the only other grandparents I knew was my grandmother, my mother's mother, and my father's father's brother, and my great uncle and great aunt. They basically raised my father and his three brothers. And we had a good time with them. They never let us call them Grandma and Grandpa. It was Aunt and Uncle. But we had, he taught me about how to save money, use money wisely, and invest money. And so basically, by the time I was elected Grand Master, I was having an income that I could fall back on some of the time that I needed to. And when I got done and we closed up the business and I retired, why, the wife and I could do a few things that we wanted to do and still live fairly good.
I know that in your life you have had several passions, and one of them you got your feet wet, literally, while you were still in the single digits of your life, and that was sailing. Tell us a bit about your sailing life.
Well, my father loved to sail. But my mother wouldn't go on a sailboat unless the sails were down and the engine was running. But at any rate, I was 5 years old. They gave me a 13-foot rowboat. And I rowed between our dock and my uncle's dock all the way down and back. And I managed to do that on Labor Day week. And
that was on what body of water?
That was on Tawas Bay. And so the next year I didn't know anything about it. But my birthday being in July, that's when I got it. It was the 19th of July. Well, the next year, because of the war situation and everything else going on, or what have you, my dad always came up on the weekends. And he took the company truck on their way back empty. And the driver and the caretaker of the club put my rowboat in the back of the truck, and he brought it down to Benny Huskins, who built boats in Bay City, boat builder. Beautiful boats he built. And he put a daggerboard trunk in the middle of the front seat. He put a hole in the front seat of the boat, and he put a mast step in the bottom, and then he rigged up the canoe sail that my dad had, that he learned how to sail in a 16-foot old town canoe. And he then made a rudder and tiller. And I didn't know anything about it till we got up to the cottage after school. And we said that I can't find my boat. So my mother called down, they got it up to me the next day. But then my dad taught me how to sail.
Some of your more recent sailing, relatively recent, has included some serious racing too.
Well, yes, I've had the pleasure. I sailed 30 Port Huron Mackinaw races, 22 Chicago Mackinaw races. I sailed all the first Chicago to Sarnia or Sarnia to Chicago races. I placed, third the 1 year on our class in Chicago race. 1967, I won my class in the Port Huron race, and I finished just 18 miles behind the 12-meter Eagle. And that was a Canada or America's Cup boat. And to be 72 foot long and I'm only 44 foot long, there's a big difference in speed. But we had a good start and we kept it going all the time.
I remember you're telling me a story a number of years ago, if my memory serves, that you also bought at least one power boat, and I'm thinking of the one that was a PT boat. Am I correct in that?
Well, it was never commissioned.
But you drove it.
Yes.
And it burned a little fuel.
Well, yes, that boat, she had two 460-gallon tanks. Of course, she had 3 engines aboard yet. And you could cruise from Bay City as far as Rogers City. But do not try to make Mackinaw City because you're not going to get there. And after the boat got sold, the people that bought it didn't heed the warning. They set out for Bay City and they got halfway north and they had to get towed in by somebody. They ran out of gas. And that's the last year they had all those engines and everything else on it.
Remarkable. With all the things that you have done and the things we're going to talk about, you're a family man too. Tell us a bit about your family.
Well, I've been married twice. My first wife and I had 2 daughters and a son, the son being youngest. My present wife, Nancy, we have 2 daughters also. And we've been married 43 years now, 44 years, I think. Okay. But I've had a very good life with the family, and I have 4 children that I still have recognition of and what have you. I have one that she decided that she wanted to get into the wrong crowd and do her thing, so I'm sorry I haven't spoken to that woman in 35 years. But other than that, everything's fine.
I know also that part of your family life has been your church life. How about that?
Yes. Well, I was baptized in Trinity Episcopal Church in Bay City. I'm the 4th generation in that church. My great-great-grandfather was the first junior deacon. Matter of fact, I was never an altar boy, but I was in the choir, and I've been an usher and what have you many times there. And then when I bought the property up north, we moved up north in August of '91. We now go to Trinity Episcopal Church in West Branch again. And I'm not on the or what do you call it? But
vestry.
But Nancy and I are ushers, and we take care of what do you call it? Coffee hour after church and do things.
I should probably mention for those watching that you were born and grew up in Bay City, as you said, but you now are a resident and have been for some 20 years now in the West Branch area.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your masonry. You became a Mason in 1961 when you joined Joppa Lodge number 315 in Bay City.
Right.
Why did you join Masonry?
Well, excuse me, my great uncle, 19 years ago, he passed away. And he was a master mason and a member of Joppa Lodge. In fact, he was one of the original, well, they say they wanted to get out of Bay City Lodge and make their own lodge. So he was one of the original members of Bay City, Joppa Lodge. And he had talked about masonry on and off, but then he died in '46, so I didn't, I had memories of it. But then Uncle Ben, when we were hunting or fishing or what have you, when I got closer to the age of 18, why, he'd say, you get a couple more years, you ought to think about joining the fraternity. Well, when I turned 21, I was down at Fort Bliss with Uncle Sam in the Army. And I had the first sergeant and my battery officer wanting me to join a military lodge down at Fort Bliss. And I told him, if I ever did that, I wouldn't be able to go home. And so I didn't do that. But I got back home, and I used to call on two people for business, and they both belonged to Joppa Lodge. So I thought maybe it might be a good surprise to join Joppa Lodge and then tell my uncle that I have already been a member. Well, everything was cool, but I got into the waiting room for my Master Mason degree, and on the second section, and they, unbeknownst to me, my cousin, his oldest son, was on first base, my uncle was on second base, and one of my other cousins was on third base. Now, first base, Bill was only 6 foot. Uncle Ben was 5'11". My cousin on third base, 6'6". And not too far out of the Marine Corps, so he could pick me up on the one arm and walk away with me. Well, they surprised me. I didn't surprise them. And I have had many very good times in the fraternity. I think the best thing that you can say to the Masonic fraternity, if you could say anything about them, we will go on, because when you join the Masonic fraternity, you are a brother. And brothers don't let you down. And it's that reason, the brotherly love that's in that fraternity, and I don't care where you go, into what lodge, anywhere in the world, you are going to be treated as a brother. And I think that's the main thing the Masonic fraternity has to keep it going, and it will be here long after I'm gone.
You told me an anecdote recently about a young lady who became stranded in a faraway land, and Masonry ended up coming to her rescue. It might be beneficial if you could repeat that briefly for the audience.
Well, we found out about it, and at that time I had just been to the Grand Lodge of Washington, D.C. I sat at the Grand Master's banquet with the head of the IRS. And I called him and asked him if there was any possible way that he might go through and have a Master Mason's daughter brought back to the United States as soon as possible.
And she was in what country?
She was over in Lebanon. And this wasn't very long after we had the problems with the barracks being gone. Sorry. I got a phone call from her father. 10 days later, she was on her way from Germany to the United States.
What a wonderful feeling.
Yes.
Indeed. Let's move along to the fact that you have been not just a member, but really a very active participating member of pretty much all of the branches of Freemasonry in enough years. And at this stage of your life, where do you find a real comfortable home? Where are you active in Masonry today?
Well, I'm still active in my own lodge. I drive 70 miles back there from West Branch every month. But I live in West Branch now, and it would be 8 years ago now. There was 8 of us got together, and we resurrected a Royal Arch chapter, N.C.O chapter number 83, that was almost defunct. And we started our own council, Sunrise Council number 93. Now, we got our charter 3 years ago for our council, and we now have a membership in our council of 46, and we have 29 in the chapter. Now, at wintertime, our snowbirds we have a problem with, but we pull in people from up to 55 miles one way to come down 2-lane roads and be active. And we have a good time, and we do pretty good work.
Good for you. Good. Let's move into the area of the Grand Lodge and your experience there, which goes back a number of years now. What led you to seeking a leadership position in the Grand Lodge?
Well, I really had no thought about it, and I got elected to the Board of General Purpose in 1970, and I got active in the board as being a board member from our district. And over a period of that first year, you having lunch with all the Grand Lodge officers and all the brothers that are members of the Board of General Purpose, I got an acquaintance with a couple past Grand Masters that one finally sat down with me one day right at lunch, and he said, pulled in my ear, and he said, "You ever think about running for the Grand Lodge?" I said, "No, sir." Well, he said, "I think you ought to think about it." Well, I didn't do much the rest of that year. That was my first year. So the second year, our September meeting, he said, "Have you thought about it yet?" And I said, "I will talk to the wife." Because I said, right now my family's coming before anything else. And I talked it over with my wife Nancy, and she said, "Well, you think we can do it at the time and what have you?" I said, "Well, it's a question mark if we do it now before the kids get in high school," because our 2 youngest daughters were just in grade school. And I said, if we wait till they're high school, I'm not about to try. But I can get out and out, we'll try. So I put my hat in the ring that second year in late September, and out of, I think the memory serves me right, there was 6 or 8 guys running that year, and I ended up 5 out of 6 or 7 out of 8, whatever it was. But I did have a few people that until the day they die, I respected very much, come over to me and tell me, "Try again." and that I did. Well, the next year, the Grand Lecturer made 66 lodges of instruction throughout the state. I made all 66 of them. In fact, that year that I got elected, I was gone 252 nights out of 362 days.
Amazing. Now, you have told me that you've had a couple of particular men who were mentors to you in the Grand Lodge. Tell us who they were and why they were important to you.
Well, the first two I can think of would be Bill Harmon. At that time, Bill was the Grand Chaplain, because he was a minister, ordained minister. And the other one would be Willard Sauer. He was the Grand Lecturer. Of course, I'd seen him 360 days, or 200 nights anyway. But these two men gave me an awful lot of good advice. I'm sorry, I got off every once in a while. And then, after I got elected, the Grand Marshal, why, Wilfred Adams from Saginaw was my Grand Master. I couldn't have asked for a better man to be my Grand Master. Right after we got closed Grand Lodge, we had a Grand Officers meeting behind the stage. Wilfred, Grand Master, he handed me a stack of papers about that high, and he said, give one of each to everybody sitting around the table. So I did. And at those 3 pages, we had a complete schedule. For the first 6 months, we had to know where we were going, when we were going, and what the dress was going to be, and everything else. And then he told me, you are going to be my proxy. I have got to be there at least 2 months in advance of the organizing and make sure everything's going to be all right. Everything is done in case of a new building being built. And if it's not, he wants to have a notice at least a month ahead of time so he can reschedule. And if everything's all right, I have to have everything ready to go an hour before we're supposed to start. And he walked through the door less than a minute late or early of exactly an hour before times. And unless I had to let him know something special that happening that day, I could just tell him we're all ready, and we started right on time. But that gave me the experience of knowing what has to happen and how it's happening and why you have to have a schedule and why you got to follow the schedule. And I had gotten a little bit lax in some of those cases about following a schedule other than trying to be elected. But other than that, those first 3 people that I was in line with. And then later on, Bob Hockstead was another very helpful person. A lot of people didn't like Royce Gurlis, but I did Royce Gurlis a favor when I was Grand Marshal. And after that, he and I got along real good.
Not a bad thing at all. No. Let's consider the fact that you became Grand Master in 1979 when you were apparently pretty precocious because you were just 42 years old then,
right.
Which still places you in a pretty small handful of men who began their Grand Lodge, Grand Master careers at that age. Your deputy Grand Master, or in a sense your right-hand man, was Bob Osborne, Robert N. Osborne of Dearborn,
That's right.
who was also a very sharp fellow. What are some of your memories of Bob Osborne?
Bob, well, in the 6 years that Bob and I and Isa May and Nancy traveled together every week, I mean, most people don't understand that when I got elected Grand Marshal, you were gone 48 out of 52 Fridays and Saturdays. We put on anywhere between 38 and 48,000 miles in the state of Michigan on a car. And you get to be pretty close friends, and more especially than Bob and Isa May. Bob and I were within 1 year of each other. And Isa
in
May,
age as well.
Yeah, but we were doing same kids, or same ages, and everything else. So we got real good, close and friends. And Bob, I couldn't have asked for a better deputy, because what Bob didn't know about masonry, I had to try to learn. But and he kept me on the straight and narrow once in a while too. But they were very, very close friends, and to this day, Isa May, every time we go to the Grand Lodge, with our Grand Family Dinner or the Grand Master's Banquet, we sit with Isa May. And Nancy and her are just bending each other's ear for all time dinner. But it's marvelous. You end up in 7 years with the people you've traveled through for 7 years that were ahead of you, and the people that were for 6 years that were behind you. You get to be close friends and very close family. Because I was told about a month and a half after I was installed, if you have friends that you play cards with every weekend or something else, you probably won't know them when you're done. And that's true. They're still our friends. But you haven't got time to do anything on Saturday or Sunday with them.
Grandmaster, let me kind of refresh your memory about some statistics from your year as Grandmaster. Then there were 511 local lodges in Michigan. Some of these numbers may surprise present-day Masons. And there were over 125,000 Michigan Masons. And that year they raised over 1,500 new Masons, so that they ended up with a gain of almost 2,000 in net membership that year, which was a substantial improvement over some of the prior years. And back then they had 292 residents in the Masonic home. And a little bird told me that you and Nancy visited every one of those 292 residents. Tell us about that.
That's correct. In the past, before me, a few of the Grandmasters would buy something and take them over to the Masonic home and drop them off, and have the nurses or whatever you distribute them to the people.
As a Christmas present? Or?
As a Christmas present. Nancy and I decided we were going to do a little different. She had a good friend that knitted socks and what have you, and head warmers, what have you, but we ended up, we had enough gifts for every person in the Masonic home, man or woman. And so 5 days before Christmas, we went over to the Masonic home and had breakfast with the first crew at 7 a.m. And when they got it done with breakfast, we went back to their rooms, and we gave them each a Christmas present. And by the end of the day, we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the home. And the last room we went to, and we got out of there, and we started back down the hall to go leave and pick up our two daughters that were there. And the residents just loved them. They kept thinking, well, you know, at that point in time, we had an ice cream making machine there. And it had been there for 5 years. I'd been there how many times? Never got a stitch of ice cream out of it. Our two daughters got ice cream out of it 4 times that one day. But at any rate, why the one happening is kind of funny. My wife grew up and she was Catholic. And her father belonged to the KSCs, and he worked on the railroad trains as a freight conductor out of Jackson, on the run from Jackson to Saginaw, and they went all the way over to, I don't know, somewhere east of 75 also, or west, I mean, east, I'm sorry. But at any rate, why, he would come home Friday night late and have to leave Sunday morning early every week to go back down to Jackson because that's where he's working out of. And one time, just before I was going to be installed Grand Master, why, he told the crew that he was working with, they were all Master Masons, as a matter of fact, except him, that my son-in-law is going to be installed Grand Master, so I got to have 4 days off. They all said that, no, Harold, you're thinking about Master. Well, it wasn't. And when we went through that next Christmas, the one room, we got done with the one lady and the two men that were sitting beside her. The one man came out the door and asked my wife, she said, or he told me, he said, do you know Harold D. Wise? My wife says, yeah, I ought to. He's my dad. And I said, yeah, my father. Wow. He said, my golly, Harold was telling us the truth. Well, as an happenstance of that, 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from the home and telling me that they had just been handed a very, very nice check to cover half the new pots and pans of the new kitchen that was being built. And where was it from? The lodge in Jackson, Michigan.
That's wonderful. Rumor has it that sizable check was $10,000 because of that conversation.
That's pretty close. Yes.
One of the real reasons for doing this legacy series of interviews is that the past Grand Masters of Michigan had such broad experience and knew so many people. And it's just a fact of life that so many have passed on already that we never had an opportunity to interview. But brothers such as yourself are links to those men because you had working relationships with them. It was mentioned that there were, at your grand session, there were 11 past Grand Masters in attendance, ranging from the earliest, Francis Dodge, from 1956, through Vincent Vatter in 1976. And I provided a list of names of those there. Time just doesn't permit us to talk about all of them, unfortunately. But would you share with us a couple of your reminiscences of some of those others that we just won't have a chance to talk with?
Rex Sackett. Rex had a few people that didn't like him, but Rex always was very kind to me, and he gave me a lot of experience that he had to. Willard Sauer, without a doubt, he was one of my main mentors, because Willard pulled me aside for half a day before Grand Lodge and I got elected, telling me what I should do and shouldn't do. C. Floridor was, I knew him, but I didn't know him as well as the rest of these people here. Percy Williams. Percy I got to know real well in the Grand Lodge of Minnesota that one year that I happened to be at. Because we had a knock on the door and it seemed like they had run out of libations and they wanted to know if we had something to add to it, that what they had left out. Bob Hoxted. Bob, when I got elected, he was elected marshal. He was the grand treasurer For me, he was my grand chaplain, or I'm sorry, treasurer also. But Bob was another mentor, gave me a lot of good advice. Milo Underhill, Milo was a fine gentleman. Every time I would talk to Milo, if I asked him a question, wasn't any doubt if he'd give me an answer. And Wilfred Adams, there's no doubt, he was the best thing I ever had for the first Grand Master, and the reason I had him. Royce Curlis, again, like I said earlier, a lot of people didn't like Royce, because Royce was always kind of gruff on the outside. But if you ever helped him out and told him he owes you one, he kept up to his promise. And Royce wouldn't take any gruff from nobody. But if you did your job and you did it right, he'd tell you you're doing a good job. John G. Polson, the last of them that's alive. John, I can remember starting to know him when I was Grand Marshal. First time we had a dedication, Bob Hockstead came over to me. He said, Chuck, he said, make sure you're the last person out of here. And make sure you walk all the way around the inside of the building and see that John Polson didn't leave his apron case. And that 1 year alone, John, I had to bring his case, 22 times? Did he got his case? But John, at that point in time, was a fantastic ritualist.
Yes.
And God loved him. And he, like the rest of us, are getting a little older, and we're not doing as well as we should. And the one man that you don't have on here was Bill Harmon. Bill Harmon, when I got elected, after we had our meeting, we sat down in the school bus that we were going back to the hotel with. He said, well, Daddy, he says, you got yourself elected Grand Marshal. I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm going to tell you just once. I'm not going to ask you anything, but he said, if you ever have a problem and you have a question you need somebody to try to answer, you call me. And he said, don't expect I give you the answer that you want to hear. And I said, what do you mean by that? He says, I'm going to give you the answer that is the best and only legal answer that I can give you. And Bill Harmon, when we buried him, we actually did a committal that day. My right glove's on top of his casket. Fine gentleman.
What must have been one of the most festive occasions of your year was the relaying of the cornerstone of the state capitol building in Michigan, which was part of its centennial observance. And you have a story about that ceremony that gives insight that probably not too many are aware of.
Well, it wasn't the day that we did. It was the year before when Holmes Swenson was Grand Master. We took the stone out.
The unlaying.
And I'm here to tell you, we had done a number of cornerstones and dedications. And I was standing there as the deputy, doing the deputy's job. And I am wondering why we have two state troopers on each side of that hole that stone is out of. And they're just standing there, they're not moving, they're looking at it, watching everything that's going on. And we also have two more down at the bottom of the step that we get off the platform when we're on. We got that box out of this box, and I had to carry it over to the table and put it on the table. And when we opened the top, one on each side said, "Excuse me, sir, we will take care of this." They reached inside the box and they pulled out, I didn't get a good look at it, but each one of them had a handful of something. And then all four of them went down the ladder, and the six of them went into the building. Well, later on, I told Royce, I want to see the archives of what we put in that thing. What those two state troopers took out of that box that day was a complete set of mint condition gold coins. There was only 3 in existence that was known of. And these were the only 3 that were in mint condition. The value was placed in 1978 at between $5 and $10 million if you wanted to sell it.
Wow.
And you know the funniest thing about it? I had times to go in everything else that came out of there was put on exhibit. I never did see those. And they never put them back in the next box, because I put the next box in. But it was funny, but nobody knew it. And nobody was going to know about it. Royce knew about it because he was the one that told the state people that were organizing this thing.
Mm.
The fact is that our Grand Lodge had the only complete transcript of what everybody did and everybody said that day that cornerstone was laid and what was in it. Nobody in Lansing had any idea what or who or what. And everything they printed out ahead of time or after that came out of our Grand Lodge vault.
Our archives. That's a great story. We're approaching the end of this interview, the constraints of time marching on, and I think it would be interesting if we asked your opinion on a few subjects. And I'm going to start with, suppose there is a man, young or old, who knocks at the door of masonry and becomes a master mason. From your viewpoint, what advice would you have for that kind of a young mason?
Well, I don't know, maybe I'm built a little differently than when I was brought up. But I was told that when you join something, you get active. I say, you get active, and I said, sad part about it is the lodge itself has very few things they can give you to be active. But other masonry things can give you elsewhere. But you've got to still belong to that lodge and maintain your membership and be there. Because there's always many times when you're putting on something that you can never use an extra 5 or 6 guys, if nothing more than to walk around and do something. And that's what I mean, be active, be there. And don't complain about something being done in your lodge if you're not there. And that's my other pet peeve. People arguing, complaining about things that are done, and they have a vote, they never went and voted. Now, if I vote for somebody and he loses, that's a positive. But at any rate, I would say just get active and try to absorb what's there, and sooner or later I think you'll end up by going through the chairs. If you don't, I'd be surprised.
Sounds like good advice. let's ratchet it up a level or two and suppose that it's a man who has decided to, as you said, throw his hat in the ring for the leadership of the Grand Lodge. And he prevails in the election, as you did. You've been there and done that. What advice do you have for a new Grand Lodge officer?
Number one, I would say that if you get a summons from the Grand Master, you better well do it. There's no excuses. You have only two, and that's when you're being ready to be planted or you are being planted. I would say the best thing that I could tell you is number one, after would be to stick your nose in the blue book and learn it from front to back, so that you don't mess up some way, sometime, and I don't care whether you're a Grand Master or down the line, without realizing what you did, because there's no excuse.
Another thought. I'm sure you appreciate many virtues of Freemasonry, but I'm going to ask you what you think is Masonry's greatest strength that has caused it to endure over several centuries.
Well, I think I said most of it in the beginning. Your friendship, your brotherly love, and your treat and respected by other members in every city, country, or any part of the world that you have a lodge. I know when I had a chance to go out of the country to the Netherlands, I couldn't have been treated with more respect and friendship in that any time. In fact, the master put a man sitting beside me telling me what they just said in English. And it was fun because when I got done, they wanted me to go over part of it as we do in Michigan. And there isn't anything anywhere in this world that I found, or any state in this world, regardless of what they say in the ritual, I can't sit there and tell them exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. Every state in Michigan, or in the states, may say it different. They may walk a little few steps or a little less steps, but we all do the same thing. And then, because of that, and the camaraderie, the brotherly love and respect for the being the Master Mason, I think that is one thing that we have, that until somebody from within screws us up, we'll be here long after you and I are long gone.
Well said. You emphasize that we all do the same thing, and yet we also know that every lodge, every local lodge, has its own culture and practices its masonry in a little different way. And every Grand Lodge is a little different. What do you think Masonry needs to be doing more of today?
Well, I think, my own lodge, in the last 2 years, we have raised, I think, 16 Master Masons. We did 6 in one night by having enough members of our own lodge open up 2 lodge rooms at the same time. And then I closed lodge at 11:48. But I think that this younger crowd, from what I've seen from the men we've taken in, it's been a great example of what I know or knew what the young men were like when I came in, Well, I'll get 50 years next October.
Wonderful. Grand Master, let me ask you a last question. Given all of the above, and if you had the opportunity to do it again, what would you do differently, if anything?
What would I do differently? I don't know. I can't really say that I would probably do anything differently because I think I did, number one, everything by the book. And as far as that's concerned, I think there were a few people who got a little unhappy with me because when I read something in a book that says you shall not, there ain't no gray areas. It's either black and white, and it's either yes or no. And it's no, and you say you can't. But I would never go back through it again. I enjoyed it. I can't tell you how many friends I made in so many places. I can't tell you how many places I've gone and to have somebody see a lapel pin or ring on my finger. In fact, just last Saturday morning, I had a young man in Anchorage look at my right hand and he says, "Oh, you got the OPC." Mm-hmm. That's the Order of Purple Cross. That's the highest honor my York Rite can give me. And he says, "When did you get yours?" I said, "Just a year ago, last July in Pittsburgh." He said, "You know, I've had mine for 2 years now." And I said, "You've been active other than just in Blue Lodge?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I was brought up, you join something, you get active." But like I said, I would never go through it again. I wouldn't even pay you. I can't tell you, I wouldn't take $1 million for all my memories, but I wouldn't put an English halfpenny to go back through it. And not because of the people that are there now, or not because of the people that will be there now in the future, or past future, past present. But no, I believe that every man that goes through it, in one shape, form, or another, he comes out of it a better man than he was to start with, or he should. And each one of us has our own little idiosyncrasies, and I got plenty of them myself. And each one of us adds something to it or subtracts something to it. And I think that's as much as I can say.
Grand Master, Freemasonry teaches that time is fleeting, and our time has flown for this interview. And I thank you very much for your time with us.
It's my pleasure, John.
Thank you, Grand Master.
Thank you.